Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Tezvav Amud Aleph at the very top. Our Gemara continues to discuss Lechi. Says the Gemara Itmar, Lechi ha'oimein me'elov. If you have a Lechi that was standing on its own, meaning to say it was not man-made to be a Lechi, rather it was, for example, a tree stump that was at the end of the Mavui. Abai Omar have lechi. Rava Amar loy have lechi. Abai says it is a valid lechi, and Rava argues and says no, a lechi that is me'elov is not valid. Heicha deloy samchin alei me'esmol kuli amal lo pligi deloy have lechi. Everybody agrees that if it was a lechi that was not what's called samchin and me'esmol. For example, if you had a tree stump, and then you had a lechi that you put at the end of the mavui, and then on Shabbos, that lechi falls down. Everybody agrees that that tree stump is not going to be a lechi. Even according to Abaye, that's not valid. So what are they arguing about? They're arguing about when it did not fall off on Shabbos. Either it fell off before Shabbos and you're left with the tree stump, or just the tree stump itself was there the entire time without a second lechi. Can you validate, can you permit tiltul in the mavui with the tree stump as the lechi or not? Abai Omar have lechi deho samchin alei me'esmol. Abai says since it was there before Shabbos and we relied upon it, meaning to say even if we didn't actually intend to then make it as a lechi, but rather it was a tree that grew there, we can use it as the lechi. Whereas Rav Amar loy have lechi kiv the mikar lava daite dahachi avidi loy have lechi. Whereas Rava says that since you did not make it as a lechi, then it's invalid to then permit tiltul in the mavui. Kosal kedaitoch. It would have been thought kihechi the pligi belechi pligi nam bechita. The same way that Abai and Rav are arguing in regards to this lechi, they're also would be arguing in regards to a mechitza, whether the mechitza is valid if it was a mechitza that was there me'elov. Says the Gemara, Toshma. Let's prove like one of these sides if there would be such a machlekes. Ha'oises sukasois bein ha'ilonois v'ilonois defonois lo kshera. If a person makes a sukkah and uses the ilonois to be the walls of his sukkah, then it's kshera. So you see from here, even though the ilonois are ilonos that were me'elov, they were planted to be a tree, and now you're using it to be a wall for your sukkah, so it's going to be valid. So like the opinion of Abaye, it would be a valid mechitza. Says the Gemara, you have no proof from there. It was planted originally for this purpose. Ask the Gemara, if you planted it to be a wall for your sukkah, that's pashit, that would be valid. What's the chiddush in the Mishnah that you can use the walls of the Elon for your sukkah wall? You might think to say that the Chachamim make a gezerah. They were concerned that if we would allow you to then use an elon that you planted for your walls of your sukkah, you might come to then use those elons by, let's say, leaning on them, which be a shtamshus be elon, and that's an iser dirabanan. Kamash malan, we're not concerned about that, and therefore it's a valid wall for your sukkah. Toshma, let's further try to prove, like the Sad that says that a mechitza me'elov would be valid if we would say that's a machlokes between Abaye and Rava. Toshma, hayasham ilan oigeder. If there was over there an ilan, a tree or a fence, oichitzas hakanim, or a type of fence of reeds, nidon mishum diyoimod. We can judge it like a diyoimid. In other words, we spoke about this more than once before, that there was a special heter for the Oile Regalim, that when they would travel and they would stop for a place for Shabbos, they would be able to draw water from the be'er and be able to then feed their animals the water. However, there's a problem. that midi arise to the problem of transferring from one reshus to another reshus. The be'er, which is 4 by 4 tfachim at least, as well as 10 tfachim deep, is a reshus hayochid, and they're situated in the reshus harabim. So how can you then draw water from the well and feed the animals water? That would be a problem of hoitzah on Shabbos. So the Chazal made a special kula to allow 4 what's called a diumdi, 4 corners with an amma by amma on each corner, and then validating that area inside to be entirely considered to be a reshus hayochid. So you can go ahead and draw the water into that area. So here it states that if a person has a tree or a fence of reeds that are going to be used for the yoimad, then it's valid. So here we see that it's a valid mechitza, even though it was already there from before. It's me'eleho. Hachanami b'mayaskina. Also here, what are we dealing with? She'ason mitchil lekach. They made this initially for this purpose, and therefore it wasn't me'elov. Ihochi asked the Gemara, "My kamash malon. What's the chiddush? Hooray! If they made it beforehand, then you have a valid diyomid." Answers the Gemara, "Kamash malon chitzas hakanim kana pachos mishloshet tfachim." That the chitzas, the fence of the kanim of the reeds, they can be less than 3 tfachim apart. And even though normally we say lavud, but you might think over here, since there's such a large space between the amma by amma corners, so therefore you might say that's invalid over here. You'd have to have something much thicker if you would make this part of your diyoimid. Kamash malan, it's valid. The boy mine Abaye me Rabba, like Abaye asked Rabba, is this going to be valid? Whereby Rabba improved it from this brisa. Toshma, the Gemara now wants to prove, like, again, if we have the machlokes between Abaye and Rava in regards to mechitza, if a mechitza me'ela is valid, we'll have a following proof. Ilon hamasich al haaretz. If you have an elon that goes and all of its branches are causing a type of chuppah down below, and it's im einoifa goivoya min haaretz gimot tfachim, and the branches extend to the point where it's less than 3 tfachim from the ground. Metaltling tachtov, because essentially you have a reshus hayochid. So since you have at least a daled by daled shetach, and you have the height of asar tfachim, the reshus hayochid, so you can metaltel underneath this canopy. So over here we're seeing that indeed we have mechitzos, even though they're me'eleh, like the tzad that would say that it's mutter, it's permissible indeed to have a mechitza that's me'eleh, like Abaye. Hachanami b'may askin, and the answer is the Gemara, you have no proof, because here also we're talking about shenatu mitchil lekach, that they planted it initially for this purpose. Ihochi asked the Gemara, letaltil bekulot, then if so, then it's a regular reshus hayachid, whereby you can go ahead and metaltil entirely without any limitation. Aloma, why does this state? Amar Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua, ein metaltilim boy ela beis sasayim. You can only metaltil 100 by 50, which would be 500 amos, a beis sasayim. In other words, there's a din of beis sasayim that, unlike the regular classical reshus hayachid, when you don't have you have, let's say, walls that are made of lavud, you have a more of a chiddush in your reshus hayachid. Then Chachamim limited the tiltul of up until 500 amos. So why over here is it limited to 500 amos if you have proper mechitzos that you planted? Answers the Gemara, mishum dahamei Dirshu tashmish because here is not for residential purposes. All this is made, if they planted it, is for people who are hunting, that they should then be in a hidden state, or also be then getting some shade from, let's say, the sun if they're going to watch, let's say, the fields. So therefore it's not a proper residency, and therefore they limited it to 500 amos. Toshma, so let's bring another proof, like the tzad that a mechitza me'eleh is a valid mechitza. Shavas betel, on the onset of Shabbos, a person found shvisa on a tail. Tail is a mound of dirt. Shehu gavoya asara, which has the height of asar tfachim. V'hu me'arba amos v'ard Beis Sosayim, which has the dimension at least of Arba Amos up until 500 Sol. 500 Amma rather, Beis Sosayim. So if a person made his Shvisa there, then he can then go ahead and carry Alpaim Amos from that Shvisa. V'chein, and similarly, the Brisa goes on to say, Beneka shehu amoik asara, if you have a cleft in a rock that is asar tfachim deep, v'hu ba'arba amos v'ad beis sosayim, again, it's either 4 amos or up until 500 amos. V'kama kitsura v'shiboiles mikifois oisa, or you have a situation where there's a field where the stalks are where the grain was cleared out, and you have around a situation where it's enclosed by mechitzas of the remaining stalks. Mahalech es hakula v'chutzula al paimama, you can go ahead and carry throughout because you have valid mechitzas. So over here we find that again these are mechitzas that are me'eleh. V'chitema yotami hachanami she'asa mitchil lekach, yotami, oh, these were also planted and made beforehand. So the Gemara says that's very good in terms of, let's say, the stalks in regards to the field. In regards to the stalks, then it's very good. But in regards to the mound and the cleft rock, that certainly was there from before. So we would have a valid proof that, like the tzad that says a mechitza me'ehlel is a valid mechitza. Ella b'mechitzois answers the Gemara that really there's no machlekes. Everybody, not only Abai, but even Rav would agree when it comes to mechitzos, there's no machlekes. Mechitzos that are me'eleha are valid mechitzos. Ki pligi belechi. They're arguing only in regards to lechi. Abai l'taimei. Abai says that it's valid according to his own reasoning. Do'amar lechi mishum mechitza. Umechitza hasui me'eleh hi mechitza. Since mechitza me'eleh is a mechitza, and since lechi is really a mechitza according to Abaye, therefore a lechi that's me'eleh will also then be valid. V'rava l'taimei, whereas Rava explains according to his reasoning why a lechi that's me'eleh is not valid. Do'amar lechi mishum heker. Since the whole purpose of a lechi is a heker, I avida biyadayim havi heker, v'i loy havi heker. But if you did not make it biyadayim to be a heker, then it's not going to be a heker. Therefore, if you have such a tree stump that was just there all the time, that grew, and all of a sudden now you want to use it as your lechi, so therefore Rava says that's not going to be valid. So now let's try to prove like one side or the other. Toshma. Avne geder hayotzes min hageder. If you have a mavui with a Evan geder, and you have in that Evan geder, you have sticking out into the entrance to the mavui. Let's say you have 4 tfachim, and then you have a tefach space, and you have another 4 tfachim, and then you have another space, whatever it is, another couple tfachim of stone. So over here we're saying that Avne geder hayotis mina geder, it goes out, muvdola zu mizu, pachas mishloisha, and there's a space between the stones less than 3 tfachim. Thereby we'll say lavud, ein sorich lechi acher, then that's valid. So again, you have the entrance of the mavui with the stones coming out with a space in between. And here we certainly have a situation lechara where it was there from before. So we see that's a valid lechi, says the Brisa. Shloshet sorich lechi acher, but if it was more than 3, then you don't have lavud, then you wouldn't need another lechi. But if it's less than 3 tvachim, these stones are a valid lechi. So again, we have the proof that even though it's a lechi me'eleh, it's valid, like Abai is saying. Gemara says, no, you have no proof. He built it initially for this purpose, because he wants to then go ahead and use it. Asked the Gemara, what do you mean? What would be the chiddush if he built it like this? Then certainly it's a lechi. He built it to be a lechi. Then everybody, including Rava, would agree that's valid. No. Mao de say, you might think to say, Lemeisar binyanahu David. He built it not as a lechi, but you might think to say that he built it to then build something else ultimately to attach to it. Kamash malon, we say that it's a valid lechi if he go ahead and built it for a lechi purpose. We're not concerned that he built it thinking that was for something else. Says the Gemara weiter, trying to prove Toshma de Tani Rabbi Chia. Koisel shetzido echod kanus mechaveroi. If you have a koisel that is entering from the other, bein shenir mibachutz bein v'shava mibifnim, whether it appears, you can see from the outside, and it is flush from the inside, ubein shenir mibifnim v'shava mibachutz, or whether it is appearance is seeing, you're able to see it from the inside, and it's flush from the outside. Nidon mishum lechi, in both situations it's called a lechi. In other words, whether you have a mavui and it either, let's say, goes in or it goes out. So in one situation it'll be from the person from the outside, he can see it as a lechi, but for the person from the inside it's flush, he doesn't see it as a lechi, or the vice versa. So here it states, Bein shenir mibachut, bein shenir mibifnim, bein shenir mibifnim shav mibachut, nido mishum lechi. So we see lechara that you have a valid lechi, even though it was me'elel, from a wall. Gemara answers, hachanami she'asu mitchila lekach. Also, it was there from before, and therefore it's going to be valid even according to Rava, because it's not me'elel. Ihochi asked the Gemara, my kamash malon. Then what's the chiddush? Answers the Gemara, ha-kamash malan, nirim bachut v'shamim bifnim, nida mishum lechi. Even though you can only see from the outside, but from the inside it's flush, still it's going to be a valid lechi. And that itself is a chiddush. Toshma. The Gemara now wants to bring a final proof. The Rav have a Yossi Behu Mavua. Rav was sitting by a Mavui. Have a Yossi Rav Huna Kamei, and his Talmud Rav Huna was sitting by him. Omar le Shamei. Rav said to his Shamish, Zil Aisi Likuzu Damaya, go bring me a pitcher of water, meaning in the Mavui. Ada Oso Nofel Lechia. Meanwhile, the lechi fell down. Ach velei biyodei. Rav, he indicated with his hands to a shamish to stop, not to then metaltil in the mavui. Kam aduchte, the shamish remained in his place and he didn't bring the pitcher of water. Omar le Rav Huna. Rav Huna said to his Rebbe Rav, Lo savalormar lismoich adikla. Does Rav not agree that you can rely on the dikla? There was a dekel tree that was right by the side to be a lechi. Omar, Rav responded, Dami haimi rabbonan kimandelo parshi inshin shmaitza. It seems to me that you're like a person who they didn't explain the halacha to. After all, mi samchin alei me'esmo, when it was something that was relied upon the day before. Taima deloy samchinon. The Gemara makes a diuk. The only reason why it's not valid is because lo samchinon, since that indeed there was another lechi and it fell on Shabbos, that's why we don't rely on the dekel tree. But if it was a dekel tree from the onset without, let's say, the lechi, then you would rely upon it. Ha samchinon have lechi, then it would be viable, even though it's me'elel. So we have a proof like the shita of Abaye, when you can use a lechi that's me'elel. Lema, the Gemara wants to try to then doiche this proof. Let us suggest that Abai and Rava really don't argue on such a lechi. So again, when are they arguing rather? When you cannot somech on a lechi. The hainu, like we said, the lechi fell down. That's where they're arguing about. But if you can rely on a lechi, then there's no machlokes. In other words, we're trying to suggest that Rav agrees with Abaye in a situation where you have, let's say, just a stump of a tree to be the lechi from the onset, and it was just there from before Shabbos, and you always relied upon that tree as the lechi, so that Rava would agree with that. Gemara says that can't be. Lo salkedaitoch dahu baraka dahava bei Rav, because there was a merpeset, a balcony that was in the bei bar chavu, that was in the house of bar chavu. Dahavu pligi ba Abai v'Rava kuli shanayu, that they argued about Abai and Rava all of the time. In other words, there was a balcony that had a pillar holding up the balcony, and that pillar was the was the entrance of a mavui. Abaye claimed that pillar can be used as the entrance to the mavui as a lechi. Rava said not, because they're arguing about whether a lechi that was me'elel is valid or not. Again, Abaye says it's valid, Rava says it's not valid. So it can't be that they're arguing about such a lechi. And therefore, so we see that indeed it can't be that they agree on such a lechi. But we see that Abaye and Rava argue on such a lechi. Take a look at Rashi, the last Rashi before the Mishnah. Va'afligu bo kuli shanayu. They argued, Abaye and Rava, about this pillar that Abaye maintained was a lechi, and Rava said not. Abaye shoyle mismach alei. Abaye permitted to rely upon such a lechi to metalton the mavui. V'Rava osar, and Rava said it's prohibited. Obviously, they are arguing about whether you can rely on a lechi or not. Again, this pillar, or the case that we talked about before, a stump that was there as a lechi. The Hilchasa says, Rashi, ke Abaye, the halacha is indeed like Abaye, that you can use a lechi that's me'eleho. The zuhi achas miyal kagam shalocha ke Abaye. There are many machlokes in between Abaye and Rava, and the halacha is almost always like Rava, with the exception of these 6 places of Ya'al, Kagam. And Lechi is the lamed of the word Ya'al. And whereby the halacha is like Abaye in regards to Lechi.